Perks somewhat lay the foundation of your creative class in Warzone, and the meta ones always seem to be evolving. Whether it be to gameplay changes or brand new perks added to the game along the way, I'm Ornery, and this is the entire history of perks in Warzone. Basically, any perk that gets an above average pick rate will be mentioned here, but go ahead and comment your favorite perk of all time. If you really want to talk about meta perks, this was the big one for the entirety of Warzone 1. If you never played Warzone 1 or maybe forgot about it, you didn't have two primaries by default like you do with Warzone today. That meant you had to immediately take your second perk slot away just to have your two primaries in your loadout. Fast forward to Warzone 2, where Overkill would be reworked into the first or second perk slot, which were not near as powerful as the third or fourth. And now at Modern Warzone, we simply have Overkill worked into the created class as a whole. No perk necessary. This was one of the better changes made to the game because Overkill was every bit of a crutch perk and kind of dictates the way you played the game. I will say, whenever there was a pistol in the meta, and trust me, we've seen a lot of them, this allowed you to not have to use that perk and use something more useful, which we're going to talk about on this list later. As far as the future of Overkill, it's looking like it's going to be a wild card in Black Ops 6, which I love because the other wild cards look equally, if not more valuable than Overkill. Really giving you something to think about when it comes to create a class. This is the perk that you would use if you weren't using Overkill. Furthermore, if you had Overkill, it wasn't uncommon to buy another loadout just to have Ghost. Because once you have your two guns, Overkill was just wasting a perk slot and doing absolutely nothing for you. Ghost was a super powerful and highly abused perk during the Verdansk era because it made you completely immune to not only UAVs, but more importantly, heartbeat sensors, which were also very abused. The Ghosted players were a plague on Warzone because this created some of the most ratty and campy behavior, but if you really wanted to grind wins in the early days of Verdansk, this was how you did it. Nowadays, not many people run Ghost, it feels like, and that's due in part because you can actually find a Ghost vest on the ground loot, which doesn't take a perk slot. Here's a perk that went a long way because the first perk slot in Warzone 1 for the most part was pretty mid, so this is what I used in just about every class. Double time just let you sprint for longer distances with a shorter cooldown between tag sprints as well. Really not much else to say other than that there's only one other perk that I would even begin to think about running, and that's our next entry. I'm gonna lump two perks into this next slot, and that's EOD and Battle Hardened. These let you have a reduced effect against explosives and tacticals, which is pretty useful all around, but still extremely situational. I think EOD was at an all-time pick rate during the RPG meta shortly after launch. The only other time I could see these being used abundantly is during ranked play, since thermites are used non-stop in competitive. Overall, great perks to be using, but still overshadowed by others. I just want to give Amped a quick shout out since this was really good in close range and fast encounters since it let you switch weapons faster. But another kind of like random aspect about this is that it let you reload rocket launchers much faster. And like we just talked about, you would know that the RPG meta was rampant during launch Warzone. So this was essential for that meta as well. People forget that Warzone 1 guns all had a perk slot you could equip. The most used one was fully loaded that let you spawn in with full ammo. So this prompted people to make two iterations of their primary, one with a fully loaded as one of the attachments, and the other one with an extra attachment in place of the fully loaded slot. If you flew in from the gulag with nothing, you landed on a loadout, you take your fully loaded class, and if you were mid-game, you wouldn't. Simple as that. Also a fun fact, in Vanguard, the Type 99 had a perk called Vital that increased hitboxes for critical points, and this was bugged to make it a one-shot kill even to the chest, which wasn't possible without this perk, so I thought it was just kind of worth a funny little mention here. Here's one of the most hated Warzone perks of all time that's been nerfed and reworked throughout the years. Combat Scout was added during the Vanguard era and was one of the most overpowered and unfun perks to play against. Combat Scout painted your enemy as you shot them and outlined them even after you were done shooting them for quite some time, pretty much giving you walls and let you wallbang just about anyone even when you're done shooting them. This was honestly a big turnoff for me and like Warzone as a whole for a period of time, but has now been reworked to be pretty much useless. I wish they would find some middle ground here. Instead of painting an outline of the player, now it only pings them like the same way you would just like be pinging someone manually if you were shooting them. If I'm not mistaken, that's how I interpret it. However, there is a way to counter Combat Scout, and that is with our next entry. As Combat Scout was taking over the meta, this quickly made a lot of people switch their first slot to Cold-Blooded to prevent being painted and wallbang non-stop. Cold-Blooded also countered thermal optics, which were long nerfed by this time, so also not really a big plus there. But another really good aspect about Cold-Blooded is not triggering High Alert when you aim at someone, which we'll talk about more later as well. For me personally, not triggering High Alert is the only reason I would ever use Cold-Blooded today. Alongside Combat Scout, we got another perk in the second slot that would redefine the Warzone meta. Tempered allows the player to refill their entire armor slot with just 2 plates instead of 3. Although not giving you any extra health, it gave the player a much quicker heal to allow for rapid engagements, and it functions the same way in Warzone today, but now you can also find a tempered vest the same way you'd find a ghost vest and have the benefits of tempered with no perk slot necessary. There's another perk added towards the very end of Warzone 1 being Serpentine. Serpentine reduced all damage across the board by 20% as long as you were sprinting. Probably one of the more broken perks in Warzone, this left the community outraged and made for some really big imbalance in Warzone. The only redeeming factor about Serpentine was that the fact that it only went towards the base health and didn't have this effect go into play when you were getting shot with your armor. But for the most part in Warzone, you're probably shooting someone who's already sprinting, so you could honestly say that this just gives you a 20% damage nerf. On to Warzone 2, where the perk system got a slight overhaul, and for the longest time, you couldn't even customize your perks and were stuck using the designated perk packages. Anyways, that would eventually go away, and once that was sorted out, we actually got a classic Call of Duty perk added back to the game, being Fast Hands. This took up either your first or second perk slot, which were more minimal of the perks that were in Warzone. So to me, Fast Hands was pretty much always a no-brainer. Being able to reload faster wasn't really all that common in Warzone, since before you had to use an attachment slot for it, but now having it across the board, no matter what gun you were holding in your hand, was a very nice feature to have. I don't know if it's just me, but I didn't start using High Alert until Warzone 2 despite being in Warzone 1. I really just think it's in a more useful perk slot up until then. High Alert pings your screen red in the direction that someone is aiming at you, giving you intel about where someone might be despite not even being able to see them on your screen. Ever since Warzone 2, it feels like this has become a super overwhelming meta perk to use and a must-have, since there are a lot of times where you would just die because you're standing still while a sniper is lining up an easy headshot on you. As stated before, the only way to prevent this from happening is by using Cold-Blooded, which doesn't feel like a lot of people run. If you know me, you know that I think Birdseye, or better yet the comms vest as well, are super useless and actually put the player at a disadvantage. Giving you a permanent advanced UAV effect that doesn't let you see if a player is above or below you honestly just sucks. But what I want to highlight about Birdseye is that it gave you pretty much a permanent UAV as long as anyone in the lobby had a UAV active, which in lobbies with like 120 people, that's really not that uncommon. So indirectly, this was without a doubt a meta perk, all things considered, even if it was just for a brief time, because they eventually had to remove it from the game entirely as they reworked the perk as well. The Irradiated perk is very simple in that it lets you move faster and take less damage while in the gas. And only damage from the gas, not from people like actually shooting you. Now, going from Warzone 2, where gas plays didn't exist, to now having a perk built around gas plays was awesome. But once again, what I want to highlight here is just a couple of exploits. That's right, we have 2 separate ones here. The first was that when paired with Quick Fix, spoiler alert, that's going to be our next entry, it let you put on plates in the storm, and since Quick Fix activates health regeneration immediately after putting an armor plate in, you would essentially be able to live as long as you wanted. Granted, you had a ton of armor plates at your disposal, which also just weren't that hard to find. Then, just a few months later, Irradiated was bugged to let you plate while you were taking any kind of damage. Normally, it was supposed to only be just like from gas damage, but this let you do it even when somebody was shooting you. So once again, if you paired this up with Quick Fix, while you're getting shot, you could be plating up, and since you're plating up, your health would be regenerating as you're actively getting shot, making a permanent health regeneration glitch, essentially. Outside of these exploits, Irradiated itself is a decent perk, but to me, not worth running over the other options, but definitely a nice plus to have if you have a specialist bonus. As we just stated, Quick Fix begins health regeneration upon armor plates being inserted, but also activates upon downing an enemy as well. To me, this is what most aggressive players would run, since it allows you to chain multiple kills together without having to use a stim for instant health regeneration. And also, I think mathematically speaking, plating up 3 times with Quick Fix gets you to full health faster than 2 plates with Tempered, since with Tempered, you're still waiting on your base health to increase despite having full armor. And also, like we just said, you can find a Tempered vest on the ground on top of having Quick Fix enabled, which makes you feel absolutely unstoppable. Quick Fix has been in Warzone since launch, but just like High Alert, I didn't see it fly into the meta until almost like a year or so ago. I'm only including Flex on this list because I know if I don't, people will rip me up in the comments. I personally think this perk is super overrated, but people swear that the increased audio is like a game changer and that they have like sound hacks. I personally don't notice the difference, but I think the delayed explosives is the only reason to run this, as being able to run over like a cluster mine and just like carefree is a pretty nice feeling, but you honestly might as well call this perk placebo. I truly don't think it does much. Probably the biggest sleeper perk going into Warzone 3 was Mountaineer. The reduced fall damage was something that I didn't know I needed, but once people started discovering that this meant getting away from and chasing other players became way more seamless. It was every bit of a meta perk. When you don't have this perk equipped, especially on a map like Vondel, you just feel overall clunky and slow. On top of this, if you have Mountaineer on when you hit a redeploy balloon, you don't even have to pull your chute when you land whatsoever. This makes it way harder for someone to shoot you out of the air since you're not even in that parachute animation. Easily one of the best perks in Warzone of all time. But that's the entire history of perks in Warzone. Let me know if I missed something. I know I didn't mention Tracker or Hacker. I just think those perks are a little like too niche for this list, but still decent. If you want to hear the entire history of snipers, scandals, glitches, or pay to win, click on screen now. Join my Discord if you're feeling crazy, and if you liked, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike, and thank you so much for watching.